ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, member of the Armed Services Committee, Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. He's also a former lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy Reserve. Thank you very much for being on the show this morning. I guess first, would love to hear your reaction to the way the president rolled out this news yesterday morning.
Well, certainly the way he rolled it out and going into incredible detail about the operation surprised me. That's not something normally that is put out by a president of the United States. And, you know, those are kinds of details that will come in briefings to us. And as a member of the Armed Services Committee, many of those briefings are done in a classified setting. It's best not to put out information that could be used by an adversary to understand how operations are conducted. So I have real concerns about that.
I want to ask you another area where you may have concerns. The president said yesterday that he did not notify top Democratic lawmakers about this raid in advance or as it was ongoing. He did tell some key Republicans, including he mentioned Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Richard Burr, but he said that he felt that Democrats couldn't keep the secret, that if he told them, the matter could leak and it could endanger the mission itself. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first, I think that's outrageous. There's no question that everybody should have been notified who is part of those protocols. The chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the speaker should have been notified. This is how a normal government acts, and I think it just continues to show that President Trump doesn't understand that Congress is a vital part of the governing of this country, and it has to be done in a bipartisan way, particularly when it comes to national security. When national security is involved, we all have to be together as Americans and understand the threat. And we all understand the threat of ISIS and the need to take out key leaders, but also to carry the fight not just to key leaders, but also be on the ground and in a very comprehensive way dealing with this rogue ideology as well as a growing threat. ISIS hasn't been eliminated with the action, although that action was incredibly important. We have to go after what are thousands of ISIS fighters now spread all across parts of Syria and Iraq. Plus, this is a very flexible type of organization that uses the internet and tools of social media to inspire violence around the world and other places. So the fight isn't over. This was a good step. I'll certainly say that. There's no question about that. But we have to stay focused on it, and that's going to take a whole of government approach to do.
Well, and Senator, that's what I was going to ask you. Obviously, a lot of questions from Republicans, independents, Democrats, reporters on exactly how the president rolled this out, how he didn't notify Democrats, how he used the words of Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi. But all that aside, is America safer today because the head of ISIS was killed? Do U.S. troops, if they have to re-engage in that region down the road, is their fight a more manageable one because this heinous terrorist has been killed?
Well, there's no question the world is better off with him being killed. I think that is clear. However, I think we've really missed a real opportunity here because our forces have moved out of that area. I think we could have pursued a more aggressive path to really take on ISIS. It's certainly clear that our forces were able to get an awful lot of intelligence information in that raid. They will process that information. They can act very quickly. But in order to act quickly, you need to have forces in the region to actually do that. Right. You know, had this happened 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, before the president took this very impulsive action of pulling people out of northern Syria, this raid would have been even more effective because it would have allowed us to follow up on that intelligence in a much more robust way than we're going to be able to do right now because we pulled our forces out.
So say a little bit more about this. I mean, how do you understand? I mean, President Trump stood up and he took credit for this, right? He was Donald Trump in taking credit for it in interesting sorts of ways. And then we get this idea of redeploying troops to protect the oil. How do you understand his strategy, the strategy of the White House in this region? Even though Baghdadi is dead, what do we make of what they're up to in this moment?
Well, I think that's a good point. We don't know what the strategy is. We don't have a strategy. Just pulling out troops in a very abrupt way, and the images that people saw of us leaving quickly, destroying equipment, blowing up equipment, that's not an image any member of the U.S. Armed Forces wants to see. Then you hear about the president talking about oil, and he talked about how much money is involved. This is not about money. This is not about oil. It's about making sure that ISIS doesn't reconstitute itself. And that should be the focus. It shouldn't be about protecting an oil site that ISIS may capture at some point in the future. It should be about preventing ISIS in the first place from reconstituting, so it's not a threat to that oil field and not a threat to the United States of America.
Richard Haas, let's talk Turkey. Elise Labad had brought up earlier what you know, that this attack had to be launched from Iraq instead of Turkey, even though that would have been safer, far more convenient for our troops, more effective logistically, but we couldn't trust the Turks. I mean, how much longer do we keep Turkey as a member of NATO? And even if they stay a member of NATO, why do we continue calling them our ally when they seem to be anything but our ally right now, when we can't even trust them to launch an attack from their country because they will reveal to the head of ISIS that we're on our way?
I think it's important to recall and never to forget with Turkey that their principal opponent here are the Kurds, not ISIS. And that is just the beginning and the end of it. Look, Turkey's an ally in name, Joe. They're formally still a member of NATO, but they're not an ally in practice. We simply don't have the overlap of interests. We don't have the assumption of cooperation, be it in Syria. With Russia, they're busy buying Russian air defense systems. We've learned historically we can't count on them to provide access to our bases. You know, NATO, the treaty, does not have a mechanism for kicking a country out. So I don't think that's the answer. But what I think we really need to do is approach Turkey not as an ally, not with the assumption that they're going to protect our interests, but rather that we, just the opposite, that we've got to narrow the relationship, find alternatives to Turkish bases, one day think about the whole nuclear relationship with Turkey. But the idea that we would allow American lives to depend upon Turkish cooperation, that seems to me reached. Senator, I don't know how you feel about that, but what is it, you know, other than sanctions, what do you think you and your colleagues on the Hill are prepared to do about this relationship? Can you imagine a narrowing of the U.S.-Turkish relationship?
Well, I can see that, and you're right. We have to approach our relationship with Turkey in a careful way. I think, you know, if we look at their actions, for example, in purchasing anti-aircraft missiles from the Russians at the same time that they're going to be operating the F-35 advanced fighter jet for the U.S. and our NATO allies, that creates a real tension, and it really raises serious questions as to what sort of ally are they really.
All right, Senator Gary Peters, thank you very much for being on the show this morning. Coming up.